I'm going to go through a bit of a whirlwind tour of lots of different things that are connected to circular economy and innovation and sustainability in food systems. It's tempting, when you hear from big companies, multinational companies, corporates, to present it in a way that it sounds like it's all in hand. We've got the perfect solution, we're doing the perfect work, and of course it's not, right? So there's constant change. We're constantly trying to keep up with what's happening. There's new demands, new regulations, but more importantly, what's being driven by our customers and consumers. And that's really where the need for collaboration and innovation is key. So what hopefully I'm going to try and do is present a little bit of what we're up to, what some of our drivers are, what's happening in the world out there. But this is all an open space. It's evolving surprisingly quickly. So let's see how this goes. Okay, circular economy, innovation, sustainable food systems. By the way, that's our mission. So Tetra Pak's mission is make food safe and available everywhere. And to me, this is very much about social sustainability, right? It's about making sure, and I think I mentioned this earlier this morning, it's about making sure that food gets to the places that it's really needed and really required as well. I have a couple of related stories to this. Both sides of my family come from the Afghanistan border. It's an area with subsistence farming and lots of tribal conflict. Not a great place in the world to be. I'm a foot taller than my grandfather. In the time that he lived and in the generation that I've lived in, I can already expect to live 10 years longer than he did, and I'm smug enough to say I have 10 points higher IQ than he did. And for the purpose of the story, I'm going to ignore things like healthcare and education, but largely these things are because of refrigeration and packaging. I've had a much better diet from the time I was born than he ever did. And there's all these aspects of my life and who I am that are significantly shifted because of what's happened in food supply chains in the time that I've been alive. So, okay, here we go. So, packaging role, issues and solutions. I've talked about the fact that it secures food safety and availability. Remember I said there was going to be a test? Expected world population, it's up there so you can read it and cheat if you want to. Expected world population by 2050. Thank you, 9 billion. Do you remember what I talked about food loss? How much food production is currently being lost? Awesome, you guys are great. And of course there's problems, right? So there's problems with food supply, with packaging, because we know that there's climate change impact. I compared the carbon footprint of packaging to another really significant sector. Do you remember what that sector was? Thank you, global aviation. Only one person, and who else but Paul Klemenko. And for us as Tetra Pak, it's a really key step for us is to be part of the solution. We don't want to sit by the side, we're right in it. For us, it's a really multifaceted ambition about how we participate in making these food systems more sustainable. And I'm going to try and show you what some of the drivers are and then what some of the work we're doing in this space is. Okay, I'll just put that up there and I'll come back to it. I'm going to park this and come back to this later. So part of that is our mission is to have the most sustainable food package in the world. And that for us is about it being made from responsibly sourced, renewable or recycled materials, being fully recyclable and carbon neutral. And I'm going to put this aside and come back to this later. I'm going to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world out there. I'm not going to go through all those sectors. I'll talk about consumers, I'll talk about retailers, I'll talk about food and beverage manufacturers, just to give you a glimpse about what's shaking, what people are thinking about, what's important, what's not. So consumers. So this is one slide out of like 150 slide deck on consumer preferences and consumer feedback about what's important to people. This particular slide just looks at ranking different kind of environment or environment-related issues. When you ask people about what's important to them and take away the environmental lens, the environment is still pretty high on people's radar, even in the post-COVID world. You know, when you ask people what their concerns are, they put environmental concerns sometimes surprisingly above, you know, really basic social concerns. And you can see that, you know, plastic litter in the ocean particularly, but also climate change, wasteful packaging, not unexpected. The big shift here, and you know, this is a part confession, I guess. I'm old enough and I've been working in this space long enough to know that the percentages of people that are talking about this stuff has hugely shifted, right? When I started in this space, we were talking about 6% of the population being sensitive to environmental issues. There's now between a third and two-thirds of people who in their everyday decisions, buying stuff in a supermarket, exercising those preferences. So this is the big shift that's happened. And it's not because I've been alive since the last millennium or working in this space since then. So consumer insights. Despite COVID, still very concerned about environmental issues and climate change. This is another one of the things that's shifted. They're now not just saying somebody else needs to fix it. It's not just government's job to fix it. Yeah, that's one of the shifts that's come out. People are talking about the fact that government, business, and individuals should all do their part to tackle it. Consumers are willing to reuse and recycle more, consume less. They still don't agree on paying more to stop climate change, but let's park that one for now. The original slide deck said consumers have some knowledge gap. Of course, I've scratched it out and gone, there's a huge knowledge gap, but that's my little bit of cynicism about, you know, how we live our lives on an everyday basis. I'll talk a little bit about retailers. So two local big supermarket chains, they've got both got big commitments around sustainability. You would have seen these turn up. And then I'm going to show you some of where this is going elsewhere in the world. So the example on the left is Tesco, solar farms, near to my heart. I used to work at Coles a while ago, and actually part of my gig at Coles was getting 3 solar farms built to supply our New South Wales stores. So I put that in there just as a little bit of a, you know, pat on my own shoulder for something that I was proud of. Food waste is the other really big one, and I'll talk about food waste and greenhouse gas emissions from food a couple of times through this session. 10 of the largest grocery retailers working with 20 suppliers each to set targets for 2030 to halve food waste. Food waste is massive. Victoria talked about Oz Harvest. Of course, there's a bunch of other companies. There's a lot of work going on in the food waste space. It's important. Teresa talked about, you know, if it looks okay and it smells okay, it's okay. I take that many steps further. Wilted vegetables in a refrigerator are actually a lot tastier because they've lost a lot of their water content and their flavors concentrated. Mold is something that only grows on the surface. You know, the body of a lot of fruit and vegetable, meat, dairy is unaffected by mold underneath. But maybe I'll leave it there. But food waste is a really important thing to look at. And I think we kind of know that. I'll show you a slide later which also shows the difference in food waste in wealthier countries compared to poorer countries, and you'll be surprised by the difference. Of course, the same retailers are then looking at ways to make transparent what's happening in their supply chains, starting to use different tools to try and understand what's happening in their supply chains. This is really messy. When you start looking in value chains, upstream and downstream, it's a really inexact science. There's no hard data. It's very difficult to work with. This is a really difficult space, but we absolutely have to go here. Yeah, we're no longer in a world where you can say, I'll just look after my house and that, you know, she'll be right. You really do need to start looking upstream and downstream and hold that thought as well. So this is the other part of what's happening then with retailers is they're starting to talk about consumer education. You've got Colruyt Group with a EcoScore label and a bunch of other labeling coming in, you know, across different retailers on how to feed the demand from consumers about is what I'm buying sustainable or isn't it? And again, this is a really vexatious space. It's not straightforward. I work for a packaging company. Well, we do a lot of processing and services as well and make equipment, but what you know us for mostly is packaging. I can tell you on my package that it's carbon neutral, but Nicole made the point earlier that the food that's in the package is 97, 98% of the greenhouse footprint and the environmental impact. So how do you solve that? Circular solutions. So again, we're still talking about retailers. Metro in France is working with Loop. Loop are doing some work here as well. It's just reusable packaging for non-food primarily. You go and buy laundry detergent. It's not that critical whether it's in a recycled polymer bottle or it's not, right? It's laundry detergent. Walmart, for example, returnable plastic crates. By the way, this isn't isolated to overseas. Both Woolies and Coles are big on returnable plastic crates, or RPCs as they're called in the business. Each of those supermarkets hold a stock of, I'm going to say, 12 million crates. Each of those crates does at least 6 cycles, more commonly 12 cycles. So you're talking about a reuse of something that's being used 72 million to 150 million times in a year, right? So this stuff's already happening. So just a summary of those across the retailer spectrum: renewable energy and waste reduction, collaboration with suppliers, sustainability scoring systems, circular economy solutions. So this is what's happening out there. This is the expectation that we are seeing, and you as consumers will be seeing on your side, as well, to see it reflected in some ways. I felt it was really important to put in some stuff about what's happening in Asia, particularly China. My business, the bulk of what we do in Australia and New Zealand is actually product and packaging that doesn't get sold in our markets. It goes to South America in some instances, but largely into Southeast Asian markets and China. And if you look at surveys, I think PwC did one recently, the environmental consciousness in Chinese and Southeast Asian consumers is far higher than it is in ours. So I thought I'd talk to some of these. Ant Group, part of the Alibaba structure, they run a e-wallet called Alipay, carbon neutral target. Alibaba itself, Melissa talked about, I'm pointing there because this is visual, right? Melissa sat here, and I remember she sat there, and so I remember what she said. So Melissa talked about sustainable finance. This is big money, right? So we're talking about $5 billion US in sustainability bonds, and they're not alien, they're happening here as well. So both Coles and Woolies have done this. Big companies are getting into how do we leverage finance? How do we leverage finance at favorable rates for green investment, for improving energy efficiency, for making circular solutions? But the point here is big Chinese companies, big Asian companies, hugely into sustainable finance and using it to drive those projects. 11/11, again, you can probably read that, but how many people know what 11/11 is? Okay, it's Singles Day. One person sitting on his own. Sorry. That was meant to be an internal thought. I wasn't meant to say that out loud. And so this is, again, a system about rewarding people who participate. You do green stuff, you get credits, you get, discounts or credits from planting trees and stuff like that. So it's really about consumer engagement on sustainability initiatives. And again, this is being driven by Alibaba. I won't talk about JD or Jingdong because otherwise we'll be here forever. So retailer key insights, retailer actions and sustainability scoring systems lean towards reducing carbon emissions and packaging, minimizing food waste. Alignment and partnerships with suppliers is essential. Collaboration, worded a slightly different way, right? So one of the key themes of why we're here, why I love the fact that ABB, Volvo, IKEA are here is because this engenders opportunities for us to work together, not just here, but across the world. And it's really important. We're seeing it here in the retail sector, which is a brutal and brutally competitive sector, right? They're kind of going, we can't do this without collaborating. Asian retailers are approaching action on sustainability goals from a 360 perspective, structured ecosystem. Yeah, so they're actually further deeper in this thinking about how do we connect all the people we need to connect on this story. I'll talk then a little bit about food and beverage manufacturers. Here we go. I'm not going to read you out all the details of those. The point of this slide is you should all have heard of those companies. If you haven't, maybe read a bit more or get out from under your rock. They've all got huge carbon neutrality targets, big targets for carbon reduction, and they're all tracking progress in those. Many of these are still scope 1 and 2. Now, I'm standing in a university and I'm standing at a sustainability-related and innovation-related event, so I'm getting that I don't need to explain scope 1, 2, and 3 to you guys, but a lot of the stuff is still scope 1 and 2 focused. Some of it you'll see is scope 3 focused, and the next slide talks to the fact that some of these guys are diving into scope 3 work in a detail, because that's where we need to go. What's happening upstream and downstream of us. So this is Nestle, Nestle's targets, and you can see that they've done the scope 3 work, and they've gone, okay, we want to focus on the products that we manufacture, and we want to focus on the packaging. And this is starting to happen across retailers. In case you hadn't noticed, the own brands with retailers are growing hugely, and they're in turn getting into their own manufacturing. So, you know, the upstream emissions in their supply chains for their own brands is becoming significant, and want to try and understand that and do something about it. Environmental claims. So if you look at, you know, what's appearing on the consumer end, it is all about health and sustainability. Anyone remember the dollar figure for consumer spend from LOHAS? Okay. This is the, you know, the 5% of the top end of the spectrum answer here. So $26 billion exactly. Thank you. Consumer spend. This is discretionary spend on health and environmental health and sustainability. So it's big spend. And this is why you're starting to see this, because everybody wants to go after that spend. Lots of claims around health issues, additives, preservatives, environmentally friendly packaging. This is really looking at what's shifted between those two surveys. But the point here is this is where the highest sort of range of claims is around what products are moving and how to get into growth markets for this stuff. This is just another example from Unilever, a big company driving lots of stuff in this space, and certainly really active in the conversation about what needs to change and how to get moving on changing it. We talked about animal products and emissions briefly somewhere in the earlier part of the day. Also going to talk about emissions from waste, but I'll focus on animal-related products for a while. So the little orangey bars on the left-hand side, it's about a shift from, if we keep doing what we're doing with our diets and the way our diets are going in population growth and trends in growing consumption of animal products, that's the emissions growth that we're talking about. And you can see that it's almost double, right, by 2050. This graph is slightly scarier, the pie chart, because the top two categories are just meat and dairy, and they're already 75%. If you then throw in fish and seafood and eggs, also animal-derived, you're up at 85% of emissions from food are from animal-derived stuff that's in our diet. So, you know, it's a big part. And people who are huge... Okay, I won't go there. And this is filtering through, right? So retailers, producers, food manufacturers are finding this consumer preference, this thinking around what emissions from animal products means. They're starting to make different choices. Growth in plant-based milk, for example, soy, almond, oat, is off the charts compared to growth in any other beverage sector. It doesn't mean that it's a patch on how much milk gets sold, but it's growing, I'm going to say 15 to 20 times faster than growth in milk. The carbon impact that sits behind these animal products is one of what then the retailers are getting into. How do we label the stuff that's in your basket so that you know what you're buying, and you can choose what aligns with your preferences about what you want to spend your money in, who you want to be. I showed you that eco label before, sorry, and I've skipped something there. That's the Colruyt Group's label on the left-hand side. There should be a picture there which has gone AWOL. Maybe it's just 3 o'clock and it needed to go and get a coffee hit. But this is about carbon content coming into that eco score labeling, so that it's not just an overall sustainability score. Carbon's a really key part of that. Some upstream stuff. So I don't know if you're aware of this. There's a bunch of work, including in Australia, around red algae going into feed for cows, and this is a way to essentially, I don't think it means that they fart and burp less, but there's just less methane content in those emissions, and so this is a big part of trying to pull emissions out of animal products as much as we can. So interesting stuff happening in the space. This is the food waste thing that I was talking about. So what this is trying to show, lots of information. I'll try and give you a simplified picture of it. The column chart at the top left, that talks about greenhouse footprint and food wastage from each of those steps. And you actually see on the consumption end, massive carbon footprint and significantly large food wastage. This is what's happening in our kitchens, right? The graph on the bottom, which is the stacked columns, so industrialized Asia, North America and Oceania, Europe, on the left-hand side, and the green is the consumption-related food wastage, right? So significantly higher in what we would talk about as the developed or the economic north compared to the economic south. It's not inobvious, right? But it's worth picking out. Okay, so food and beverage manufacturers, key insights. More ambitious carbon reduction targets. Goes without saying, I showed you great examples of those. Carbon footprint claims expected to surge. On top of reducing packaging impact, manufacturers continue on their route to greenhouse gas emissions by doing a bunch of things, primarily diversifying product portfolio to lower carbon stuff. So, this is like a 25-minute, 30 picture of masses of stuff that's actually going on out there, with lots of people's livelihoods involved in understanding and developing, the things that I've shown you little glimpses of. So, and the point here is just to show you little glimpses because it's a seed for whatever the other conversations are that follow, right? Question then is, are we doing something about it? And if so, what is that? What do we take of it? And what do we make of it? And what do we want to do? And this is one example, right? And I'm going to step you through then a bunch of other things that we're up to. So this was our way of understanding where we fit in the picture. We make and sell equipment for processing milk primarily. So in Australia and New Zealand, that's the biggest part of our business. It's hundreds of millions of dollars worth of exports out of Australia. And it's 20% of New Zealand's GDP is dairy export. So, this is a significant part of our business. Equipment that deals with dairy products and the packaging that gets wrapped around those products. So we looked at where we sit in our value chain. So this is our scope 3. We're the 3% in the middle, 41% upstream, 49% downstream. That's our kit sitting in Fonterra, in Numi, in sanitariums, sites, producing the stuff that we all go and buy and gets exported. 7% end of life. So that's our understanding of our supply chain. Where we went with that was to start quite early in the piece, start setting targets going. And this is one of the glories of not having been tied up in the complexification of greenhouse and climate change that's happened in Australia. It's one of the glories of being a Swedish-owned company, is that setting ambitious climate targets was a frighteningly long time ago. We set these targets and we're delighted. We had 2020 targets, we've blown them out of the water. We've now got a 2030 target for net zero in our own little slice, scope 1 and 2, but we've got a 2050 net zero target across the whole value chain, right? And this is where there's no complete, beautiful, corporate, generic story. I have no idea how we're going to get there, because value chain stuff is all that upstream stuff and all that downstream stuff. And we are starting to drive more and more engaging in meaningful collaborations, conversations with our customers about how we engage with them to try and mitigate those emissions. But upstream is not that hard. You've got a handful of suppliers, you know where your stuff's coming from, you can work with them. Downstream is significantly harder. It's me telling Fonterra how they should run their factories or how they should run their business. Fat chance, right? But we're in there. We're in there talking to them. We heard ABB talking about how people hand over, see here, visual, right? ABB guy sat here. About how handing, you know, the trust that comes with people going, hey, your kit runs our plants, let's work together, how do we do this? We want to do this or that. So this is a big part of the collaboration, but then also the innovation, cross-fertilization. Joanne talked about cross-fertilization at the start of the day. You know, we're here together, a bunch of different sectors, different people, what are these conversations that spark, you know, whatever those next set of changes is. And that's really what's important for us on Scope 3. So this is, you know, one part. Don't bother reading the other stuff. Here's the little graph in the corner that's worth calling out on this one. So we have a target, an intermediate target. We're saying by 2030, we already want to get all those sites, all those companies that have our equipment processing their milk and cheese and butter and whatever else, we want to help them reduce their water consumption in half, cut their food loss, product loss in half, reduce their carbon emissions in half. So, and then I'm going to show you some examples of what we're doing about it. Okay, lots of stuff on this slide. I'm going to pick out a few things to talk about, right? What's in the middle, in the funnel, is what we're trying to, the outcomes we're trying to get to. Minimize product loss, reduce wastewater, improve production efficiency, decrease detergent use, and I'll touch on that one particularly. This is really about, for a business, can I save money? Does it save me time? Does it make me more productive? And does it give me environmental savings? How do we get those things together? Then there's some examples. There's some examples about some of the kit that we're putting into our customer sites to help with that. Tetra Pak E-beam is just a sterilization technology. You're about to put milk into a pack, you want to make sure it's sterilized. Don't use water and chemicals to do it. We do it electronically. You save a heap of water and chemicals. Easy. Tetra Pak separators with end capped. This is a cream separator. We run it under a partial vacuum. It actually reduces air friction inside the separator, which runs at really high speeds. Dramatically, you get a massive energy saving from tagging a low pressure vacuum pump to the system. Really simple and easy, but you know, people don't go there because it sounds complicated. Let's pick the Spiraflow heat exchangers. Old as, you know, the day, heat exchangers, people sitting beside a fire kind of fundamentally understood radiation. Heat exchangers been around for a long time. Spiraflow heat exchangers just the design is that they create a secondary flow within the coils. You get much higher heat transfer coefficients. You get much more effective heat transfer with lower energy consumption. The homogenizer 500, there's a whole thing with pressure. You need quite a high pressure for homogenizers. Generally, milk homogenizers' big function is to break down the fat globules in the milk. Our homogenizers are essentially a whole bunch of homogenizers working in parallel. It means we can operate them at significantly lower pressure, and we're talking about a 40% lower energy consumption for homogenization. So these are particular bits of kit that we make, we think about, we design, we improve, because we know where it's going and we want to help our customers get more efficient. I'll talk a couple of examples about lines, because then it's not just about here's my piece of equipment, thank you very much. It's how do we build this into a line in a factory as well. That graph in the bottom with the orange boxes isn't particularly clear, but I'll talk you through it. It's quite simple. So JNSD is juice, nectar, and still drinks. Let's just say we're talking about juice here. You can take a whole bunch of juice and put it through your process. Most of it's water, as you know. There's a huge amount of energy consumption in just sterilizing or pasteurizing the water. So this just splits it. You take a concentrate, you put water through a UV system, much lower energy consumption. You blend it in an aseptic pack. You've got a huge reduction in water and power consumption in a system like that. UHT one step. Most normal process is raw milk comes in, you pasteurize it, you then work out what you're doing with it. Some of it goes to UHT, some of it goes to normal pasteurized milk. That's just taking raw milk and going straight to UHT. You've cut out a process in the middle. A lot of this thing about simplifying processes in food systems is about the fact that they need to be cleaned, right? You want to make sure that the stuff you're making is tickety-boo, whatever the technical word for that is. It's got to be food safe, right? It's got to be quality assured, and the food safety. There's just no question about that. So the cleaning is really rigorous, and if you can eliminate process steps, you've got a whole bunch less kit that just needs to be cleaned. Massive water and chemical savings in just doing that. So the one-step UHT is really good for that. There's some other really interesting examples. So the bunch of the work we're doing in New Zealand at the moment is about looking at electrifying evaporators and dryers. The only way to get the thermal intensity, the heat intensity into most dryers and evaporators is to use coal or gas, right? Because it's the way to dump masses of heat into some body of equipment. If you want to put that heat in electrically, you need massive heaters, and then you need, I'm going to say fat cables. They're not actually fat cables, but you get what I mean. You need to have the electricity supply to be able to drive those. Now, in New Zealand, it's kind of nice because you've got a mostly renewable grid, so converting to electric dryers and evaporators massively drops your greenhouse gas emissions rather than using coal briquettes, which is what they're doing at the moment. So there's a whole bunch of really interesting work in the technologies. And again, you get what I'm trying to do here. I'm just trying to give you little snapshots of this wide range of work that a company like ours is involved in working with customers on. They're all really open fields that need massively more innovation to get to where we want to get to. Digitalization and automation. Of course, this is a big part of the deal. How do we leverage? And again, you heard people talking about aspects of digitalization and automation, both in terms of vehicle systems, but surveillance in different ways, and not in, anyway. Huge opportunities for digitalization and automation, just the fact that there's manufacturing capacity growth still coming. There's that much more food that needs to be processed, produced, better managed, so there's still lots of investment going. And please, let's not continue to make it so that someone's cranking a handle is a bad example, but you get what I mean. I mean, putting in automated solutions these days is much more significant to get the efficiencies you want to get. There's a whole bunch of kit sitting out there that is not automated. That just means, stop-start processes. Somebody's got to walk around. It depends on whether they switch to one process to the next in time or not. There's lots of really basic automation potential still out there. Industry 4.0, for those of you who know, this isn't about hardware systems. At the end of the day, a customer wants to make good decisions based on information. And this is really about getting them the best information out of their production processes that you can give them so that they can make really well-informed decisions about how best to manage what they're doing. Increased focus on sustainability. How do you leverage the digitalization and automation to reduce water consumption and all that sort of stuff. So in a nutshell, what are you looking for? You're looking for increased asset utilization. This is very engineering heavy. I am at UTS, so I've taken the liberty of talking about this stuff. That means reducing machine losses, reducing material losses. Management loss is about people, people intervention, people steps that make things work a certain way and not another way. I'm going to take a little aside here. One of the things that I'm working on is getting artificial intelligence robotics into the recycling sorting facilities. Those of you may remember earlier, I was talking about the fact that sorting's done based on materials. There's sensors that work out what the material is, and then they work out which way they want to sort that material. And they're really good at it. It turns out that AI is absolutely brilliant at this as well, right? It seems like a really banal use. On the one hand, we're having a conversation about whether AI is sentient or not, and here I am saying AI is really good at sorting rubbish. It is actually really good at sorting rubbish. I don't even know why it meant there, but it's the management losses. It's the people thing. It's the kind of job that you just don't want a person doing. You don't want someone standing at a conveyor covered in rubbish for 8 hours, picking your recycling to put it into one bin or another. Sorry, I digress. And I won't dwell on those because I went too far on my side story. Water consumption. We have a bunch of production plants across the world. Of course, we've mapped where they are, water scarcity issues, how much water they use, and then we're prioritizing what we want to do about water consumption at those sites. This one's... So, one of our biggest suppliers of paperboard is Klabin in Brazil. They take the fiber, the pulp, the trees, out of a managed forest. In an adjacent area, there's a indigenous species forest, Araucarias. When I was growing up, one of the kids who I was friends with, but it was always a bit weird. His dad was a keen gardener, and he had an Araucaria tree. And because our relationship wasn't great, for some reason in my head, Araucarias were somehow emblematic of that. So when I heard we were growing Araucaria forests, okay, let's not go there either. 7,000 hectares of Araucarias being rehabilitated, it'll lead to an area equal to the size of England being certified for its carbon and biodiversity credits. And this is just one of the things we're doing to go, we play in this space, we play in systems that are about sustainable forestry, they have impacts on biodiversity. How do we make sure that they're being well managed, and how do we make sure that we get positively into this space? This is a great example. Quite a boring ingredient. I love that. So ProMIC is a company that some of you may have heard of. We started work with. I talked about alternative sources for protein and fats. This is one of those companies. This is a really interesting new area that we're getting into. And super keen. So precision fermentation, show of hands. Anybody heard of precision fermentation? Okay, 0 hands. That's pretty cool. That means I've got something really edgy. So this is how the bulk of your protein and fat that comes from animal sources at the moment, this is how you're going to get them in the future. They're going to come from bacteria and fungi. They're going to be grown in labs and processing plants. It's exactly the same. Functionally, it has absolutely 0 difference to what you're consuming. And of course, that's a Petri dish, and that's somebody in a lab with a bunch of fungi growing in them. But this is really exciting. This is really the space where this is the kind of new frontier. And it's scary, right? 20% of the GDP in New Zealand's dairy products, cows out there, as we saw, eating red algae so that they can burp and fart less. But this is where we're headed. So all this stuff is going to be made in the lab. How do we, as a food manufacturing, food processing systems supplier, relate to what's happening with sustainable food systems? Nicole and I were talking earlier this morning about the sustainability journey isn't about preserving what we've got. It's going to be an awesomely different world. And I add awesomely in front of that because a lot of what's coming is super exciting, and it's going to completely shift how we live and eat and transport ourselves around the place. I'll flick through these quickly. So this is another one of those companies, Perfect Day. We're rethinking every day starting with food, no antibiotics, no hormones, just dairy. So far so good, right? But then you start looking. So this is some of their customers, Villa Dolce, making gelato, premium gelato. It's not animal product. This is dairy product that's come from fungi. Nutrition your body can use, really sophisticated marketing, really playing into that health, but also the environment kind of space. And here's the reasons. Why protein from flora? Real dairy that's 100% animal free, taste, scoops, spreads the same, lactose free, cholesterol free. And at the moment, this is the odd labeling that's sitting around it to recognize that it's different. Back to the package. How long do I have?
If you want questions, you have 13 minutes, but if you want questions,
Okay,
save some for that.
thank you. So I'll talk a little bit about what's happening with packaging. I gave you a snapshot of that before. Packaging made solely from renewable, responsibly sourced materials. That's what's in our packaging at the moment on the right-hand side, right? 70% paperboard. This is a global average across all the different types of packaging we make. Plant-based plastics. I talked about Bonsucro, sugarcane alcohol, bioplastic, getting out of fossil plastics. You with me? Yes? Why do we do plant-based plastic instead of fossil plastic? Thank you, Paul. So much lower carbon footprint than fossil plastic. It's important to point out that it's not compostable. We're still making the plastic. It's just from a plant-derived source. So this issue around, it's still recyclable because it's polyolefins, which are readily recyclable, but it's not compostable or biodegradable. Conventional plastics still in our system. I talked about the fact, and I'll tell you some more about how we're very quickly getting into supply of certified recycled plastic coming into our packaging, and aluminium foil. And I'll tell you a bit more about aluminium because it's great as a packaging material. It's now the most greenhouse intense part of our packaging, and that's why we're keen to get it out of our packaging, and it complicates recycling. And there was a question earlier from a person who I can't spot anymore, who asked about what's happening upstream, and that was one of the things. We're trying to pull the packaging out, trying to pull the aluminium out of our packaging so that it's better, it's more, the design for recyclability is there from the get-go. Yep. We're looking to increase polymer content. I've talked about the fact that the biopolymers are important because they're lower carbon footprint than fossil polymers. Increasing the share of paper in our packaging, replacing fossil materials, getting out of aluminium. You've heard those ones before. Higher renewable content. So this Tetra Pak package, this is actually here in Australia. So there's a couple of companies, Brown's Dairy in WA, that put most of their product into Tetra Pak. So it's a 100% plant-based pack. It's fiber, paper, and plant-derived polymers that are used in that pack. That's already in the market. I'll talk about it in a moment in the context of carbon neutrality. All the paper comes from FSC sources. Since April 2020, every pack we've sold is able to be certified under FSC, and a big part of FSC, in case you didn't know, is also then about biodiversity. It's not just about forest management for trees, but there is a real focus on how biodiversity in those forests is managed as well. Recycled content, I've touched on polymers, and I'll show you a bit more about that. That's the RSB certification that goes with the recycled plastic, certified recycled plastic that's coming back in. INEOS, I don't know if any of you are keen sailors, but the INEOS team was prominent in the America's Cup. I don't even know why I went there, but they're a big company in the space and they're doing a lot of really interesting work on recycled, post-consumer recycled plastic content. Of course, this is also coming back into secondary packaging. And secondary packaging's a lot easier when you're talking about food contact stuff, right? Because secondary packaging is not in contact with food. So bringing recycled materials back into that's really straightforward, including things like wrapping for straws. low carbon footprint. We've spoken a little bit about carbon. Um, Food waste, was the big one here. So think about an aseptic package. Think about your soy milk carton, or I'm dating myself. Think about your oat milk carton. And the fact that it's shelf stable, you can leave it sitting in your pantry, it can sit on a supermarket shelf for months, right? Actually, it's like 2 years. And it's completely happy. Nothing happens. The stuff inside isn't degrading. This is the glory of what Ruben Rousing did all those years ago, is to come up with a way of treating milk primarily and sealing it inside this packaging that would give it the life and the transportability. Doesn't need to be refrigerated. So think of all the cold chain greenhouse gas emissions, refrigerated milk storage, refrigerated processing, refrigerated distribution centers, refrigerated trucks, refrigerated shelves in your supermarkets, your refrigerator at home for stuff that's chilled milk, right? And then you think about UHT or shelf-stable milk, and it doesn't need any of that. So that's on the product side. Remember Nicole talked about the 2 to 3% packaging versus 97, 98% in the product. So that's what that's helping to mitigate, is the emissions associated with the product. And then of course we've got this, I'll flick past that one. That's Tetra X, and there's a carbon neutral because it's fully plant-based labeling stuff. I won't dwell on that. This is an interesting comparison. So this was work done by a local company called ThinkStep. And they really challenged us. They said, if you want to talk about carbon footprint for your packaging, you've got to compare it. If I, as a consumer, walk into a shop and I want to buy my milk in glass or my milk in PET, then how does the footprint compare? There's the comparison. Glass, what's missing in here, and for certain products, aluminium and steel are important. They come in a close second behind glass, really high from a carbon footprint perspective. Then you go to virgin PET, recycled PET is a bit better. The big saving from glass to some of the other materials is just the weight. A glass bottle that carries a litre of milk weighs 550 grams itself. So you've got a lot of material. The carton that serves the same purpose weighs 28 grams. So compare 558 with 28 grams of material serving the same packaging purpose, and it drives massive differences in environmental footprint. Just the fact that you can use so little of it to serve the purpose. We also have this nerdy brick shape, which is we're just stuck with. That's just how we've always done packages. But the beauty of it is when you stick it in a cardboard box, you put that box in a pallet, you put that pallet in a truck, or you put that pallet in a container on a ship, you're shipping mostly product because those bricks pack together really well. If you think about circular jars, you're upwards of a third of what you're shipping is air, other than the weight of the material that makes up those jars. So there's 3 reasons why we're super good. Mass efficiency, space efficiency, and of course the renewable content. The fact that the cartons are made mostly of renewable wood fiber. That's a little bit of a distribution of where the impacts come from. Package production. So this is raw material, how it's made, the processing that goes into the fiber. Distribution 5 to 10%. And actually end of life accounts for 1% of the carbon impact. Local recycling. I'm going to touch on this briefly. You saw me show the Dunny shot before. I'm not going to show you the Dunny shot again. That's Paul. He's the CEO of SaveBoard. That's the company we've partnered with. I got asked a question before about why an event like this is important, and it's because we're not in the waste management sector, or it's one sector we're not in. No, we're not in the waste management sector. We don't really want to run recycling plants, but we need partners. We need collaboration. We need innovation in this space to make the circularity happen that we so desperately want to have happen. We've partnered with Paul. Paul's company makes that product. That's that zero waste cafe. I think I showed you a picture of that in Manhattan. Their walls are done, and obviously they're done with only one type of carton to make the board. It's a really simple process to make the board. That's the plant at Tetra Pak in New Zealand. That plant's been operating since November 2021. There were 4 risks for us in this. One was whether the tech would be any good. The tech's fine, it makes boards really reliably. The second was around whether we had the right partners. Is the company solid? Do they have good backers? Have we got the right investors on board? The majority shareholder in Saveboard is now a New Zealand Stock Exchange listed company called Freightways. They own companies in Australia. Big, credible, very reliable, publicly owned company. So it's great. Second risk, tick. Third risk was when we made the product, would anybody pay? Would anyone want to buy it? I'm delighted to say that sales are absolutely gangbusters, which has led us very quickly to the fourth risk, which was, will we be able to get enough feedstock, right? And at the moment, the sales are higher than the feedstock we can get our hands on. First plant, at the moment, is on schedule to open in Sydney, well, Warragamba actually, in third week of November. So the kit was shipped out of Europe at the end of August. They drew little pictures of kiwis and kangaroos on it because they knew where they were sending it, which was kind of nice. The containerized part comes into, I'll get this the wrong way around, into Newcastle. The crated stuff comes into Wollongong. The install crews arrive on the 17th of October to start the install and commissioning, and we'll be making boards here by the end of November. I won't show you that. It's a video of the production process. It's hideously simple. You shred cartons, you stick them in a hot press. They bond together because of the polymer content that's in them. There's no glues or chemicals or resins that's added. Hey presto, you have board. And the board is, it's, you heard Victoria talking about buildings. How do you take about buildings and make them out of recyclable stuff and reuse that stuff? The joy of the Saveboard product is you take it back to Saveboard, put it in the shredder, and make a new board. So, it's set up to go through that loop several times. I'm going to stop there because, I'm getting, or you're probably getting, that I could talk about this stuff for the next 3 days because it excites me, and I'm delighted to be doing what I'm doing. How about we do questions?
Right. We can do a couple of questions before we break. So I'll run over here.
Quick one. When you want to recycle that board, how do you separate the plastic from the fibers?
So the polymers that are in the beverage carton material, that's what serves the purpose of the glue in the material. So that's actually what, in fact, the video is running. You can see the shredded up cartons there are getting a layer of craft paper on one side, and it's being fed into a hot press. And the purpose of the hot press is it raises it to a temperature where the polymer melts and flows and becomes the bonding agent. So we actually want we want the caps, we want the straws to come back with the beverage cartons because that's what bonds it together.
Yeah, but the other way, when you recycle the cartons, how do you take the plastic out of it?
You mean if they normally go back into a pulper? Yeah, so in a normal, so I say normal because it's kind of what happens everywhere else in the world. It just doesn't happen here. In Japan, for example, there's a high demand for beverage cartons because they go into making paperboard and tissue and things like that. They put them in a repulper, which is basically a top-loading washing machine. Top-loading washing machine runs at about 50 degrees C, warm water. It agitates. In somewhere between 8 and 25 minutes, the fiber breaks down into a soup, which is the really basic paper making process that's been used for centuries. You run the soup through a sieve so that all the stuff you don't want is left behind, and then you start to make paper out of the soup because that's got all the wood fiber. Now the question is, when you run it through a sieve, you're left with all the other materials, typically the plastic that's in there, and the solution to that depends on what country you're in. So in Japan, for example, where waste to energy is really prominent, they're using all the residue to generate heat for their boilers. So it's displacing fossil fuels, but it's being incinerated. There are other places in the world, in Malaysia at the moment, where we're taking the residual polymer and aluminium and doing the same process, but without the fiber. So it's just making construction sheets that are only polymer and aluminium. So different recycling processes in different parts of the world for that part.
So one question over here. Yeah.
Thank you so much. We were really curious about when you're looking at alternatives for milk products, are there other issues that you've got to think about with the environment, like the amount of water in almond manufacture and things like that? Is there a way that you can kind of put all of that in one environmental issue and find a better...
It's a yes and no. I mean, I think if someone came to us and said, hey, I've got this new UB plant-based product, tastes great, great demand for it, but huge water consumption, would we say, sorry, we don't want to work with you because your water consumption is too high? I don't know, but we'd probably work with them to at least help them solve that part of the puzzle for their production process. Yeah, upstream, when it comes to farming practices, it's one step further from us and it's harder to influence or do something with. And this is partly where I think consumer preference will drive as well. Is that water consumption better or worse than all the animal product related issues? I wish there was a simple answer, but there isn't. Part of what's happening in my house, so we used to be, like 2 litre, 3 litre containers of milk, that's it. It's not anymore. There's now a litre of milk, there's a litre of soy, there's a litre of oat, right? So that's what's changing because different members in the household have different preferences and they can get what they want. So some of that shift is, it's not one or nothing, it's like just a spread.
Hello, thank you. I just wanted to ask about the use of bioplastics in your lids. Do they break down in the same way as the normal plastics, or is there a benefit in their degradation as well, in the process of degradation?
Yeah, so no. So for all intents and purposes, when you make a plastic from a plant-derived source, we're still making a polyolefin. We're still making either HDP or PP, and that's what's going into the material. And what we don't want is that material ending up in the environment, right, and then breaking down over a long period of time. We want that material to come back so that we can recycle it. And again, one of the questions in an earlier session, my apologies if you weren't there, was about what are we doing on upstream side. So I'll repeat the answer to that. For caps, for us it's relatively simple. Tethered caps. Build caps so that, of course, you can take the cap off and pour what you want to, but the cap is physically attached to the carton so that it doesn't go wandering. It comes back with the carton to be recycled.
Thank you.
There we are, but I think we finished. Was it one?
Just for a quick one, I was reading a study with retailers that they're more likely to recycle if they know the product, where the product is going and who the product is going to. Have you thought about distributing like the soy milk in a package and then the retailer puts all the containers back in and it goes back to Save Board? Like, is there an easier way?
I like where you're going. And so for those of you who didn't hear, is there a better way to people are more likely to recycle if they know what's happening with the stuff that they're recycling. Absolutely agree. I think it builds trust, it builds credibility. People know that if they recycle, it's actually doing something. It's better if they can see the product. No debate about that. The challenge is how to make it visible, right? So I like where you're going, which is it a crate that you actually get your stuff in? And I don't have a straight answer to that. I'd like to think that what we've seen happen with Save Board and particularly some of its high profile use. So most of the stuff that you can see in that picture, it has that layer of craft paper on it because it's just going into a wall and it's going to be plastered and painted. So people don't even know it's there. The nice use is the pictures I showed earlier in the day, which are board that's exposed. So you actually, people pick up the board and they go, that's a Happy Happy Soy Boy carton, right? And when they can see what the material is, it tells its own story and it really reinforces so this is where the recycling ends up. So part of the reason for picking Save Board was that there is potential for it to create that visibility.